I was thinking this week, there's a ton of people who love political drama. Well, they got a heaping helping this week with the still not complete BC election. Not complete because they're waiting to count 170,000 absentee ballots. But this one's a beauty. I talked about this earlier in the week when I said this is the first election where Alberta's NDP, led by Premier Rachel Notley, is actually rooting for a Liberal majority. And the reason's straightforward. The BC NDP has promised to fight the building of the Kinder Morgan pipeline, that expansion, with everything it's got. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the impact for the NDP itself, but simply put, it's not a united party, with the divisions fueled not just by differences on oil extractions and pipelines, but it's underpinned by the difference between being in opposition and being in government. Opposition is easy. Far less scrutiny by the press. No financial accountability for promising whatever, a free smorgasbord. Practicality doesn't enter into it. Rachel Notley, on the other hand, has no such luxury. Financial challenges are real, and hence her support for Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. But divisions within the NDP are not important when you compare them to the BC NDP's and the Green Party's willingness to undermine established decision-making procedures through the National Energy Board and the federal government that approved Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, contingent, though, on 194 specific national and provincial conditions in conjunction with the federal government's commitment to $1.5 billion for an ocean protection plan. Now, I appreciate the BC NDP and the Green Party garnered much support due to their opposition to the pipeline, but in a democracy, you don't always get your way. To go through the lengthy approval process as they did with Northern Gateway, which was rejected, and with Trans Mountain, which is approved, and then say to hell with the process because I don't agree with the outcome. That is dangerous stuff. Dangerous for our democracy, dangerous for our society. Just extend that attitude into every other area, and you got a problem. It also makes a mockery of the Green Party leader's Andrew Weaver's promise that the Greens will pursue only evidence-based policy, because there was no shortage of evidence presented during the approval process for the Trans Mountain pipeline extension. Opponents simply didn't agree with the conclusion. Here's a little test for Mr. Weaver and the Green Party's sincerity about pursuing evidence-based policies. Environmentalist opposition to genetically modified food is without evidence, completely rejected by the scientific community. Yet it's still embraced. The opposition to GMOs is embraced by so many in the environmental movement. Let's hear Mr. Weaver stand up and declare his support for GMOs. The historical record makes really clear that politicians don't like evidence. They don't like evidence when it's contrary to their agenda, especially when it comes to economics and finance. Evidence and research are like a stake through the heart of ideologues. Evidence and research are the antithesis of ideology. I regularly ask questions like, what lessons have our politicians learned from Europe? Here's the key. The answer is not only nothing. It's, what's your point in asking that? And that's frightening given how many politicians absolutely want to repeat the same policy mistakes of Europe right here. This is the great failure of the political left and the far right. More accurately, it's the failure of anyone who thinks politics first. Their politics takes precedent over everything, certainly over research, history, and evidence. There's so many examples. I literally could go on all day here. Well, look at the opposition to free trade by Donald Trump on the right and the Leap Manifesto crowd, media darlings like Naomi Klein, Council of Canadians on the left. None of that's based on evidence. And don't even start on taxes. That's a nightmare. We refuse to acknowledge all the research, for example, that concludes the most economically detrimental way to tax is through corporate taxes, followed by individual taxes, with the least disruptive way to the economy being to tax through sales taxes. But my goodness, try implementing that. The anti-business crowd goes nuts. If you're listening from Alberta, by the way, you're probably thinking this doesn't pertain to you because you don't have a provincial sales tax. But you missed the point. You should. If maximizing economic growth is the key, then the province should have a provincial sales tax that's harmonized with the GST, but accompanied, and this is the key point, accompanied by lower individual and corporate taxes. But my gosh, can you imagine that one in Alberta? Both the left and the right. The ideology police are not going to allow that one. What's really interesting to note is that some people would rather have higher unemployment, lower government revenues, and lower levels of economic growth than follow what the evidence suggests. My point is that there's very little about our tax regime that is evidence-based. The big question is, Can we afford this any longer? Can we afford to hurt the economy by ignoring evidence-based policy? Can we afford to ignore evidence-based policy when it comes to things like healthcare delivery? Come on, look at the massive increase we're about to incur due to an aging population and advancing technology. I say we actually can't afford that any longer, but we'll try. I hope Mr. Weaver and the Green Party in British Columbia keeps their word and supports evidence-based policies, but I certainly won't be holding my breath.